as to how to proceed. I think that in the future, military personnel in Ukraine will swear a loyalty to the country of whose citizens they are. That's your assumption, or is that a fact? Well, that's what I assume. People will fulfill their military obligations while retaining their native citizenship. We can't divide people, cut them up in pieces. I think that we have to use a form of where people take upon themselves certain obligations. They promise to respect the law of the state in which they are serving. So that's together with their military contract. There are certain analogies to a contract. They have to promise to observe the rules. We had analogy in 18, according to decree. These czarist officers were not sworn in, but they promised to serve loyally. To what degree have the agreements between Russia and Ukraine serve as an example to resolve the problems with Moldova and Azerbaijan and other states entering into the Commonwealth? In a broad sense, as a form of resolving conflicts, this is applicable to all republics of the former republic. The state delegation which I had has to negotiate not only with Ukraine, but with all the 15 republics. In a narrow sense, this is applicable to Belarus, for example, where a large part of the military groups have been discussed under the Paris and Vienna negotiations. You're here in the studio. You've seen our program. And as one of the leaders of our countries, a member of the cabinet, what can you say about the remarks of Mr. Khasbulatov? I think that the existing social economic situation is such that such declarations are at the very least irresponsible. Yes, of course, it would be good to have lower taxes, but then the question arises as to how do we pay for medicine? How about the teachers that you mentioned and the military, who can't simply be abandoned together with their families? The government will lower taxes, but the government needs time. 11 days since the government has been formed is no basis for a demand for a resignation. And we have to know the constitution of the land, of the country which you are leading. Only by knowing the constitution can we ask the Supreme Soviet to form a government. That's the task of the president, and we have our confidence in him. So our current government is not about to resign. So that's one more topic for a confrontation between the parliament and the cabinet ministers. I think this is a subject for common sense. I'd like to remind you that we had the state advisor on legal questions and legal policies, the deputy minister, Mr. Sergei Mikhailovich Shakrai. So Russia and Ukraine have agreed on dividing up the Black Sea Fleet, and for a time, this tension has been eliminated with regard, likewise, to the armed forces as a whole. But there are other problems. The advisor to the United States President, Mr. Brent Scowcroft, in an interview given to ABC, expressed concern over the uncoordinated actions taking place in the republics with regard to the market economy. There's talk of a trade war. Ukraine, for example, has erected a coupon barrier, and it intends to dump its rubles on Russia. Russia has forbidden almost 60 items for export abroad. The prices will be determined by the policies of other members of the Commonwealth. So follow me is saying the Russian flagman, but the other ships in the wake of this ship are not following. The Financial Times writes that in the Commonwealth, the Russian parliament might not be able to withstand the pressure from the population over rises in prices. In the West, past, there is noted the confrontation between the government and the parliament. To resolve it one way or the other, only Mr. Yeltsin can do that, and the methods at his disposal are limited, and a shift into a stabilization period can come only through either more market methods or administrative methods. Millions of people have to decide that they will trust the government and tolerate what's going on. Now, with regard to privatization, radical privatization, the people are getting the traditional forms of social justice. There's a little bit more money and some ceilings on the very high prices. A tragic event of 13th of January of last year was the topic of the meeting of the Lithuanian parliament. The participants of the parliament stood silently for a minute to honor the victims who died in the Vilnius television tower. But Lithuania has not been forced to its knees, according to Mr. Landsbergis, speaking before the crowd, standing before the parliament. The head of the Lithuanian parliament called upon them to be united and to understand the situation. In Riga, in Latvia, in the meantime, there have been actions begun against the army. These red and black flags, which are normally used only during a hunt for wolves, are now used with regard to the Northwest Group of troops. Here, in the offices of the Northwestern Group of troops, there are demands that the Soviet troops be withdrawn from Latvia. In this regard, the commander-in-charge, Lieutenant General Mironov, told his correspondent, these are painful, anxious questions, and they're asking of us no less than they do of the government. Today, they noted the victims of January. Among the military personnel, there are demands that there be conducted a meeting of the officer corps of the Commonwealth. We're getting telegrams from Ukraine, Moldova, Belarus, Azerbaijan, and Armenia. The officer meeting club also supports this idea, but it has now issued a statement addressed to the Parliament and the states of the Commonwealth. The tragedy of the army, it is stated in this declaration, threatens to grow into a national Yugoslav or Lebanese or Georgian type variation or something else if we do not stop the breakup of the armed forces. We will not permit the politicians to turn our weapons against each other. Those are the words which conclude the text which we received in our agency. Today, a meeting of deputies of the Supreme Soviet of Georgia conducted a meeting which was very noisy, and there were 11 parties represented. They discussed ways to stabilize the situation in the Republic. As for the general situation in Georgia, as we have learned near the city of Helsinki, without a single shot, roughly 100 persons were arrested who supported Zviad Gamsachurdia. There were a number of demonstrations throughout Georgia, which said the new government was a junta. Supporters of Gamsachurdia are trying to block the railroads and the highways in the area of Sukhumi and Zugdidi, thus depriving the Republic and Armenia and the Caucasian region of food and material goods. The events of the last days leave no doubt that the war of sovereignties has reached our external borders, foreign borders, and the Brest authorities have dared declare they have new customs duties for citizens who are causing the western borders of the Commonwealth, regardless of which state they come from. So remember, when you cover the Brest border, from now on you have to pay the local treasury. If you're on a train, 100 rubles, for a car, 600, and for each bus, 6,000 rubles. That's because the city authorities wanted to have a new source of income from local tourism, but they didn't check out the old law. They were somewhat hasty. The local authorities, somewhat earlier, had set up quite different rates, customs rates, and no one canceled these earlier rates. So now the city, municipal, and oblast authorities have to wait to see who will retreat from his position. And our authorities, the authorities, do not consider themselves obliged to give any answer here. The decision of the Russian Parliament on the 13th of January has, according to this decision, the 13th of January will be the day of the press. 280 years ago, the first Russian paper, Vedomosti, was published. Today, there was a meeting of the Vice Premier Borbulis and the Minister Poltoranin with the journalists. The very fact this frank conversation took place with correspondents and journalists from Komsomolskaya Pravda is not an accidental thing.